What happens when a beloved movie star sits down for what should be a friendly chat, but instead walks into an ambush that destroys a talk show host's reputation forever? It only took 31 seconds of pure arrogance from Stephen Colbert to turn Mark Wahlberg from a guest into a warrior. And what followed was the most shocking meltdown in late-night television history. The studio lights were blazing hot that evening as Mark Wahlberg walked onto the set of The Late Show. The audience was buzzing with excitement. They loved Mark. He was one of those rare Hollywood stars who never forgot where he came from. Boston, born and raised, he carried himself with the kind of genuine humility that made people root for him. Tonight, he was supposed to talk about his new movie, share some laughs, and give the fans what they wanted to see. But Stephen Colbert had other plans. From the moment Mark sat down in that guest chair, something felt wrong. The usual warm welcome was missing. Instead, Colbert leaned back with this smug little smile, the kind that said he knew something you didn't. The audience sensed it too. The energy in the room shifted. "Mark Wahlberg, everybody," Colbert said, but his voice had an edge to it. "The guy who went from rapper to actor to, well, we'll see what happens next." Mark smiled politely, thinking this was just Colbert's usual style. "Thanks for having me, Stephen. Great to be here." "Is it though?" Colbert shot back immediately. "I mean, really? Because I've been doing some reading, Mark. Some very interesting reading." The smile on Mark's face faltered just slightly. This wasn't how these interviews usually started. Where were the jokes about Boston? The friendly banter about his kids? Instead, Colbert was staring at him like a prosecutor about to deliver a closing argument. "I'm not sure what you mean," Mark said carefully. Colbert reached over and picked up a stack of papers from his desk. He made a big show of flipping through them, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably long. The audience was getting restless. This wasn't the fun, lighthearted show they'd come to see. "See, here's what I find fascinating about you, Mark," Colbert said, still not looking up from his papers. "You've built this whole image as this working-class hero, this tough guy from the streets who made good. But is that really who you are?" Mark shifted in his seat. His jaw tightened just a fraction, but he kept his cool. "I think my life speaks for itself, Stephen." "Does it, though?" Colbert finally looked up, and his eyes were cold. "Because what I see is someone who's been playing a character for so long that maybe he's forgotten who he really is underneath all that Hollywood polish." The audience was dead silent now. This wasn't comedy. This wasn't entertainment. This was an attack, and everyone could feel it. Mark took a deep breath. He'd been in this business long enough to know how to handle difficult interviews. Kill them with kindness. Stay professional. Don't give them what they're looking for. "You know what, Stephen? I think there might be some confusion here. I came on your show to talk about my new film, maybe share some stories with your audience." "I didn't realize this was going to be some kind of interrogation." Colbert laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Interrogation? Mark, I'm just asking questions. Isn't that what journalists do? Or are you saying I shouldn't be allowed to ask you hard questions?" "Of course you can ask hard questions," Mark replied, his voice still steady but with steel creeping in. "But there's a difference between journalism and whatever this island." "Whatever this is," Colbert repeated, his voice rising slightly. "What this is, Mark, is me refusing to just sit here and lob softball questions at another Hollywood celebrity who thinks he's above accountability." Mark's eyes narrowed. "Accountability for what exactly?" Colbert shuffled through his papers again, clearly enjoying the theater of it all. "Well, let's start with your past. All those times you've talked about growing up tough on the streets of Boston. The implication being that you understand struggle, that you're somehow different from all the other privileged actors in Hollywood." "I am different," Mark said simply. "Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've spent the last 20 years getting very comfortable with that Hollywood privilege you supposedly reject." The audience was starting to murmur uncomfortably. Some people were shifting in their seats. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. They'd come to see their favorite movie star, not watch him get ambushed by a talk show host with an agenda. Mark leaned forward slightly. "Stephen, I've never claimed to be anything other than what I am. A guy from Boston who worked hard and got lucky. I don't know what point you're trying to make here, but maybe you could just make it instead of dancing around it." Colbert's smile widened, and it was not a friendly expression. "The point, Mark, is that authenticity matters, and I'm wondering if yours is just another performance." That's when Mark's composure finally cracked, just a little. His voice stayed level, but there was fire in his eyes now. "You want to talk about performance, Stephen? Let's talk about this whole setup. You invite me onto your show under the pretense of a normal interview, then try to turn it into some kind of gotcha moment for your own entertainment." "I'm not trying to entertain anyone," Colbert said, his voice getting louder. "I'm trying to have an honest conversation." "Honest?" Mark laughed, and it was a harsh sound. There's nothing honest about this. You're not interested in having a conversation. You're interested in creating a moment. Maybe I am, Colbert admitted, and for the first time, his mask slipped completely. Maybe it's time someone called you out on your act. The room went dead quiet. Even the cameras seemed to stop moving. Mark stared at Colbert for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was deadly calm. My act? Your whole tough guy from Boston thing? Colbert said, clearly feeling like he had the upper hand now. The working class hero routine. The idea that you're somehow more real than everyone else in Hollywood. Mark was perfectly still for about 3 seconds. Then he smiled, and it was the most dangerous smile anyone in that studio had ever seen. You know what, Stephen? You're absolutely right about one thing. What's that? It is time someone got called out on their act tonight. Colbert's face went pale. Something in Mark's tone made it clear that the tables were about to turn in a way he hadn't expected. What do you mean by that? Colbert asked, but his voice had lost its confident edge. Mark leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking completely relaxed. Well, since we're talking about authenticity tonight, let's really talk about it. You want to question whether I'm real? Fine, but let's also examine what's real about this whole situation. I don't know what you're getting at, Colbert said, but his hands were fidgeting with his papers now. What I'm getting at, Stephen, is that you've been sitting there for the last 10 minutes trying to tear me down, and I'm wondering why. What's this really about? The audience was leaning forward now. The dynamic had completely shifted. Mark wasn't on the defensive anymore. He was in control. It's about honesty in Hollywood, Colbert said, but he sounded less sure of himself. Is it? Or is it about ratings? Mark's voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath. Because I've got to tell you, this feels a lot more like manufactured drama than honest journalism. Colbert tried to regain his footing. That's a convenient way to avoid answering the actual questions. What questions, Stephen? You haven't asked me a single real question tonight. You've made a bunch of accusations disguised as questions. There's a difference. I asked about your authenticity. Mark nodded slowly. Right. You questioned whether a kid from Dorchester who worked construction before he got into acting is authentic enough for your standards. A guy who's been married to the same woman for over a decade, who talks openly about his faith, who still lives in the same area where he grew up. You're questioning whether that's real. Anyone can say those things, Colbert shot back. Anyone can say them, sure, but not everyone lives them. Mark's voice was getting stronger now. And here's what's interesting to me, Stephen. You're sitting there questioning my authenticity, but what about yours? Colbert's eyes went wide. What about mine? Well, let's see. You built your whole career playing a character. A fake conservative pundit on a comedy show. For years, you pretended to be someone you weren't, and people loved you for it. Then you got this job, and suddenly you're the arbiter of who's real and who isn't. The audience was starting to murmur. Some people were nodding. Mark was making sense, and Colbert was starting to look foolish. That was comedy, Colbert said defensively. Everyone knew it was a character. Did they, though? Because I remember a lot of people who took that character seriously, and I remember you enjoying the confusion. You liked being able to hide behind that fake persona when it suited you. Colbert's face was getting red. That's completely different, is it? You're sitting here lecturing me about authenticity when your entire career has been built on pretending to be other people. At least when I act in movies, everyone knows I'm acting. The audience was getting more vocal now. There were some scattered claps, and a few people were actually laughing at Colbert, not with him. Look, Mark, Colbert said, trying to regain control. I think you're missing the point here. No, Stephen, I think you are. Mark's voice was firm but not angry. He wasn't losing his temper. He was dismantling Colbert piece by piece with pure logic. The point is that you invited me here tonight not to have a conversation, but to create a spectacle. You wanted to be the guy who took down Mark Wahlberg on national television. That's not true, Colbert protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Then why didn't you tell me beforehand that you wanted to have this kind of interview? Why didn't you give me a heads up that you were planning to question my entire life story and career? Colbert opened his mouth, but no words came out. I'll tell you why, Mark continued. Because you knew that if you'd been honest about your intentions, I might have chosen not to come on your show. And then you wouldn't have gotten your big moment. The audience was fully on Mark's side now. There were more claps, and someone in the back actually shouted, "Tell him, Mark." Colbert looked around the studio, clearly realizing that he was losing his own audience. Look, this is getting out of hand, he said. Is it? Or is this just what happens when someone actually pushes back against your act for once? Mark smiled, and it wasn't mean or cruel. It was almost sad. Stephen, I came here tonight in good faith. I respected you and your show enough to show up and try to give your audience a good time. But instead of treating me like a guest, you treated me like a target. I was just doing my job, Colbert said weakly. Your job is to entertain people, not to ambush them. Your job is to make your guests feel welcome, not to make them defend their entire existence for your amusement. Colbert tried one more time to salvage the situation. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Maybe? Mark raised an eyebrow. Stephen, you've spent the last 15 minutes trying to tear me down on your own show. That's not getting off on the wrong foot. That's a deliberate choice. The audience was getting restless, and not in a good way for Colbert. People were starting to boo, quietly at first, then louder. Okay, maybe I came on a little strong, Colbert admitted. A little strong? You questioned my entire identity, my background, my authenticity, my family, my career. You did everything but call me a fraud outright. And when I pointed out the irony of you questioning anyone's authenticity, you got defensive. Colbert was squirming in his chair now. The confident, smug host from the beginning of the interview was gone, replaced by someone who clearly hadn't expected his victim to fight back so effectively. I think maybe we should move on to talking about your movie, Colbert said desperately. Mark shook his head slowly. You know what, Stephen? I don't think so. Because here's the thing about authenticity that you seem to have missed. Real people don't just roll over when someone tries to bully them. Real people stand up for themselves. The audience erupted in applause. It was loud and sustained, and it was clear that they were applauding Mark, not the show. And that's what I'm doing right now, Mark continued when the applause died down. I'm showing you and everyone watching what it looks like when someone actually keeps it real. Colbert looked around the studio in panic. His own audience was cheering for his guest against him. This had never happened before. Not once in all his years of hosting had a situation spiraled this far out of his control. Mark, please, Colbert said, his voice almost pleading now. Can we just reset here? Start over. Mark looked at him for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was calm but final. You know what, Stephen? Some things you can't just reset. Some lines. Once you cross them, you can't uncross. What do you mean? I mean that respect is earned. And tonight you threw away whatever respect I had for you as a host and as a person. You can't just ask for a do-over after you've shown your true colors. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. They could sense that something big was about to happen. My true colors? Colbert's voice cracked slightly. Yeah, your true colors. See, I thought I was coming on a talk show tonight. Instead, I walked into an ambush by someone who thought he could make himself look bigger by trying to make me look smaller. That's not journalism, Stephen. That's just bullying with cameras. Colbert tried to interrupt. Mark, I never meant to. Stop. Mark's voice cut through the air like a blade. Just stop talking for a minute and listen, because I'm about to tell you something that might actually help you, even though you don't deserve it. The host's mouth snapped shut. You want to know what authenticity really looks like? It looks like treating people with dignity even when you disagree with them. It looks like being honest about your intentions instead of setting traps. It looks like having the courage to admit when you're wrong instead of doubling down on being a jerk. Mark stood up from his chair. The audience gasped. Guests didn't just stand up in the middle of interviews. This was uncharted territory. Where are you going? Colbert asked, his voice small. I'm leaving, Mark said simply. Because unlike you, I actually have some self-respect. You can't just leave in the middle of an interview, Colbert protested. Mark turned to face him directly. Watch me. The audience erupted. Some people were cheering, some were gasping, some were on their feet. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of Colbert's complete humiliation. Mark, please, Colbert begged. If you leave now, it'll ruin the show. Mark paused at the edge of the stage and looked back at him. Stephen, you ruined your own show the minute you decided to treat a guest like an enemy. I'm just refusing to be part of your mess anymore. But what about your movie? Don't you want to promote it? You know what? My movie will be fine. People who want to see it will see it. But I'm not going to sit here and let you use me as a punching bag for your entertainment. Colbert was sweating now, clearly realizing that his career might be ending right in front of his eyes. Please, Mark, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. You made a lot of mistakes tonight, Stephen. But the biggest one was thinking that I'd just sit there and take it because I'm on your show. Mark shook his head. That's not how respect works. You don't get to demand it. You have to earn it. The audience was going wild now. People were standing and cheering for Mark. Some were even booing Colbert openly. The host looked around desperately, but there was no saving the situation. Mark, wait! Colbert called out one last time. Mark stopped and turned around one final time. You know what, Stephen? I actually feel sorry for you. Because somewhere along the way, you forgot that the people who come on your show are human beings, not just content for your amusement. And that's a sad way to live. I didn't forget, Colbert said weakly. Yes, you did. Because if you remembered that I'm a real person with feelings and dignity, you never would have ambushed me like this. You would have treated me like the guest I came here to be, not like some villain you needed to expose. Mark walked toward the exit, but he wasn't done yet. He turned to address the audience directly. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry you had to see this. You came here for a good time, and instead you got to watch your host try to tear down someone who came here in good faith. That's not your fault, and it's not fair to you. The audience applauded him thunderously. But I want you to remember something, Mark continued. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them. Tonight, Stephen Colbert showed you exactly who he is when he thinks the cameras are rolling and no one can stop him. Mark looked back at Colbert one last time. The host was slumped in his chair, looking defeated and small. And Stephen, if you ever want to have me back on this show, here's what needs to happen. You need to apologize. Not to me, but to your audience. Because they deserve better than this tonight. They deserved a host who could entertain them without tearing someone else down. Mark, I'm not finished. Mark's voice was firm but not cruel. You also need to take a long look in the mirror and ask yourself why you thought this was okay. Because this wasn't journalism. This wasn't comedy. This was just cruelty dressed up as entertainment. The silence in the studio was complete now. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. I came here tonight to talk about my movie, to share some laughs with your audience, and to have a good time. Instead, you turned it into some kind of character assassination attempt. Well, congratulations, Stephen. You definitely created a moment that people will remember, just not the way you wanted them to. Mark started walking toward the exit again, then stopped one final time. Oh, and Stephen, next time you want to question someone's authenticity, make sure your own house is in order first. Because tonight, everyone in this room got to see which one of us is really keeping it real. And with that, Mark Wahlberg walked off the Late Show stage, leaving Stephen Colbert sitting alone in front of his own audience, who were now openly booing their host. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the most spectacular meltdown in late-night television history. Colbert sat there for a moment, looking around at his hostile audience, before finally saying in a shaky voice, "We'll be right back after this commercial break." But everyone in that studio knew there was no coming back from what had just happened.